Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. I'm going to give the same disclaimer that I gave on my last review, which is that I just less than a week ago got Invisalign on. So if I'm talking a little differently, it's just because I'm still adjusting to how to talk with this Invisalign stuff in my mouth, straightening the teeth just a little cosmetic, whatever you want to call it. So apologies if I'm a little muffled at times with my mouth, but hopefully I'll get it down pat pretty soon. We have a lot to go over today. There is a new Marvel lawsuit. It feels like this is our second show in I think 2 months that's centered around a Marvel lawsuit, but it's not about one of the actors this time. It's about the characters. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the weekend box office. We have a new 2021 domestic summer champ as well as a yearly champ to talk about. So much to get to, but before we do that, as we've had to do unfortunately a few times over the past few weeks, I wanted to recognize a couple of people that passed away this past week. The first is Melvin Van Peebles, who was an icon for decades. He made the landmark 1971 film Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song a landmark in black cinema. It helped to establish the blaxploitation genre as a whole. Still a movie that is referred back to today. He was also a multiple Tony nominee for the musical Ain't Supposed to Die a Natural Death. He acted in several movies and TV shows. For me and perhaps some of my generation, I first came across Melvin Van Peebles. He was in Jaws the Revenge, but it wasn't a very big role. But he took on the role of Dick Halloran when ABC did the TV miniseries adaptation of The Shining, and I think that was the first time that I actually connected that name to that face. And then as I got older, I started to associate him with his other more notable work, admittedly. But he passed away this past week at the age of 89. And then another actor that passed away, Willie Garson, who has been in well over 100 movies and TV shows, perhaps best known for his roles on Sex and the City and White Collar. He appeared in films including Being John Malkovich, Groundhog Day, There's Something About Mary, passed away of pancreatic cancer at the age of 57. So, there's no way to stop and acknowledge every name that comes across, sadly, every single week. And I don't want their exclusion from this show ever to feel like I devalue their contributions. But I do like to take the time to recognize some people that have had huge impacts on screen and off as they pass this life and go on to whatever's next. So Melvin Van Peebles and Willie Garson both passing away. Of course, condolences to their friends, families, and fans. Let's move now to the weekend box office, and for the fourth week in a row, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is number one at the domestic box office. You have to go back to Tenet last year to find the last film that spent 4 consecutive weeks at number one. And if you want to go back to the pre-pandemic times, that would be Black Panther, fittingly enough. That was the last movie to spend 4 consecutive weeks at number one. Just over $13 million. One of the reasons why the show is a little bit later upload than I would have liked is because I was waiting around for Disney to upload the final numbers for the Fox, the Disney, the Searchlight films, because there were several that I wanted to look at this week. So that is the final figure, $13,031,411 at number one. And that is a significant number, not only because it's number one for the fourth weekend in a row, but because it has now officially surpassed Black Widow and has become the number one grossing movie of the summer, also the number one grossing movie of 2021. Also the number one grossing movie post-pandemic, or at least since theaters closed for the pandemic. We're obviously still dealing with a lot of the effects of the pandemic itself. So a lot of notables for Shang-Chi that's going to sit in those record books. Now, of course, what people will say, and rightfully so, is that this does not take into account the money that was made by Black Widow because it was available day and date on Disney Plus with Premier Access. So there's streaming revenue that Black Widow collected that Shang-Chi did not, because it wasn't available, and that is a valid argument to have. But at the same time, this is what's going down in the box office records, and unless they change the way that the records are kept, and I'm not against that, honestly, if the studios decide they want to release those streaming numbers, that streaming money, week to week, and we include that in the total, I would love as complete a record of the revenue that a film makes as possible. But until that day, we have to go by what's released, what the studios provide week to week, and not just the first weekend and subsequent legal filings. things. And so as of right now, Shang-Chi goes up as the higher grosser over Black Widow at number 1. And this is actually very timely. We're going to get to the rest of the top 5 and the box office numbers later, because there is actually a new Marvel lawsuit in the news. You've probably seen it if you follow movie news or Marvel news about the rights to certain characters. And I've seen that discussion framed a little bit in the last few days. A little bit of hand-wringing, a lot of speculation, like, is Marvel about to lose the rights to its most popular characters? That's not exactly what's going on here. So I wanted to go a little bit into this lawsuit, explain exactly what is being litigated here, and then also talk about the potential outcomes. So first of all, this is a lawsuit that is being brought by Marvel. So right now, at least in this case, for this specific lawsuit, it is not people suing Marvel. It is Marvel basically appealing to the court to retain the rights to these certain characters. And that's because there are the artists, the estates of artists, and the families of some Marvel artists that have said that they plan to file to get the rights back or the licenses back to some of the characters that were created by those artists decades ago during their time at Marvel. This all goes back to a law called the Copyright Revision Act of 1976. And what that did, it established actually several things that are cornerstones of copyright law, including fair use, which is something that I certainly have to use a lot here on YouTube if I have to dispute a copyright claim. But what this act also says is that if you create something that someone else has the rights to or that is licensed, and then over time, a set amount of time, that thing becomes more valuable, you have the right to terminate that license to get the rights to that back, and then you could potentially reap the benefits of something that is increased in value over time. So at first glance, it would seem like, oh, well, that's what these families want to do. They want to get the rights back to these characters because now with the MCU and all these movies, a lot of these characters are worth substantially more than they were even 10 or 15 years ago. But this is the key sticking point. This law does not apply to things that were made for hire. So if you were hired by a company to make something and you made it for that company, you cannot then go later on and say, I have the rights to that thing and I would like the license to it. And that's the legal sticking point that we're talking about here. The court filing that Marvel put in basically said that these estates, these artists, these families do not have the right to file for these copyrights and licenses back because it does not apply to them because they made the work for hire for Marvel. These are the artists, estates, and families that are suing. Larry Lieber, who is Stan Lee's brother, he co-created Thor, Ant-Man, and Iron Man. Steve Ditko, that family is looking to regain the license. The big character there, Spider-Man, and also Doctor Strange. Don Heck, who co-created Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Iron Man. Don Rico, who also helped to create Black Widow, and Gene Colan, who helped to create Falcon, Captain Marvel, and Blade. And these are all characters among many, many others because Marvel was famously collaborative. So the important thing to note here is that if this went against Marvel, this would not be the dismantling of the MCU. All the things that I've read said that what would likely happen would be a co-ownership situation. So Marvel would retain ownership and rights, and these artists, estates, and families would retain ownership and rights. So they would basically be co-owners. That would mean that the people who got the licenses would then share in the revenues for Marvel projects domestically. This only handles things inside the United States. Outside the United States, it would retain, or it would stay in Marvel's hands and Disney's hands because they are the parent company. This would also mean that these people would have potentially the right to license these characters out to other entities in addition to Marvel. So if another studio wanted to use one of those characters, if you want to do a DC Marvel crossover, if they were able to co-license these characters, they would be able to do that if they got these rights back. However, history shows that the odds are not in favor of these folks that are trying to get the rights to these characters back because it has been argued in court many times and successfully in court that these were indeed characters that were made for hire, that Marvel hired these artists to come and work for them, that they made it at the direction of Marvel, that Marvel paid them for their work, had creative control over their work, and therefore that Marvel owns the characters. Now, the families would argue and say, and they are arguing and saying like, well, wait a minute, these were independent contractors. Marvel didn't hire them. They were basically freelance artists and writers who made these things and then, sold them to Marvel, but they created them and they were not hired by the company. And this is the crux of the legal argument. If we look at the complaint that Disney filed in court, this is essentially what they say. They say, quote, "Over its long history, MCI and its predecessors and interests, collectively Marvel, have engaged numerous writers and artists to contribute to Marvel's comics. Lieber, who started working for Marvel in or around 1958, is one such writer. Marvel assigned Lieber stories to write, had the right to exercise creative control over Lieber's contributions, and paid Lieber a per-page rate for his contributions. As a result, any contributions Lieber made were at Marvel's insistence and expense, rendering his contributions work made for hire, to which the Copyright Act's termination provisions do not apply. This case thus involves an invalid attempt by means of termination notices purportedly issued under that act to acquire certain rights to iconic Marvel comic book characters and stories published between 1962 and 1964. So it's instructive to look at the recent past to see where this case may go. And we don't have to go back that far. We actually only go back to 2014 because Marvel settled 2 lawsuits that year. One of them was from Gary Friedrich, who was attempting to regain rights to the character of Ghost Rider. Marvel settled that suit out of court. But the big blockbuster settlement that was made in 2014 was with the family of Jack Kirby, who had been in court with Marvel for years to try to get a cut of the rights to the characters that Jack Kirby had made at Marvel. Now, that case was settled by Marvel out of court, and there was reportedly a substantial amount of money paid to the Kirby family. But one thing that has to be noted is that a few different courts had ruled against Jack Kirby's family and Jack Kirby's estate, saying that indeed the stuff that he had done for Marvel was work for hire. The decision was appealed over and over again, and at the time the settlement was made by Marvel, it was actually under consideration to be taken up by the Supreme Court. At that point, Marvel was able to come to an agreement with the Kirby family, and the case did not move ahead to the highest court in the land. Now, the lawyer in this case is the same lawyer that represented Jack Kirby's family for many years, and he's given public indications that he does want to take this lawsuit all the way. This was a quote that he gave. "At the time, I was asked whether I regretted not writing The Legal Injustice to Creators, which indeed I did. Mr. Toberoff, who's the lawyer, said in an email, I responded that there would be other such cases, and now here we are." Let's really cut down to what's most likely here. The most likely thing that we're going to see as an outcome of this case is a settlement, as we saw in the Ghost Rider case, as we saw in the Jack Kirby case. And in my opinion, I think it's for a couple of reasons. Number one, the legal precedent seems to be on the side of Marvel. Even if Marvel plays hardball and takes it to court, what we have seen is that it is likely that they will win the case. It will be appealed to a higher court. And if this proceeds as has gone in the past, it will keep going up the chain until maybe they take it or try to take it again to the Supreme Court. But there's a risk involved there if you're one of these entities trying to get the character rights back, which is that if you lose the case, if the Supreme Court either refuses to hear your case or rules against you, you could be, first of all, liable for hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars of legal fees if that's the judgment. And also, you're not going to get anything. Basically, the high court will say it's not your property and you go home with nothing. Now, I know that you have to publicly posture if you're representing these families that you're going to take it all the way because you want to get that settlement out of Marvel. There has to be a point where Marvel's going to decide we could continue to litigate this, but at some point it's cheaper to come to terms and settlements with these families than it is to continue to fight this legal battle. And I think that's what we're going to see in this case. Should these families, should Steve Ditko's estate and Jack Kirby's estate and all of these artists share in the success that these characters have had? I think they absolutely should. And in a perfect world, Marvel would have gone to them when these things started blowing up and said, hey, we appreciate the work that you or your family members have done, and we are going to cut you in on these profits in appreciation of that. That would be wonderful. But that's not the world that we live in. And so I think that we're likely to see a settlement, but I'm not taking a pro-Marvel position here because I do think that these artists and their estates and families should be compensated for these things. It's very sad that they have to go through the legal system in an attempt to either get a judgment or a settlement to get what is rightfully theirs. And it's not fair. But what we're seeing now is a case of very, very creative people who decades ago created did things at a time legally when no one could ever have anticipated the ramifications of how much value they would have later on down the line. Of course, now when people sign on to do stuff, there are ironclad legal agreements that state what is yours, what's not yours, what you own, what you don't own, at every level. If you work for any kind of company where you produce anything, you basically sign away all the rights to those things unless you specify exactly what it is you want to keep, what you are claiming intellectual property and ownership over. Otherwise, it belongs to that company. But that's the modern day. So I really do feel for these families. And I do hope that however this is settled out, that they do receive some remuneration for the work that their family members did and get to share in some of the profits, because that's only fair and that's only right. So I am in their corner. However, in my opinion, and I'm no legal scholar, but just looking at this lawsuit, looking at these previous lawsuits and the ways that the courts have gone, I don't really see them winning this lawsuit. I just hope that they're able to find a way to benefit from it in some way, because they deserve that. So those are my thoughts on this new Marvel lawsuit. Of course, if there's any new news, I will bring it to you here on this show, and as we continue to expand programming, hopefully on other shows. Let's move on to the rest of the box office top 10. And at number 2 was the biggest new release, Dear Evan Hansen, which came in under a lot of expectations, just under $7.5 million. This was predictable because ever since the movie premiered on the festival circuit and was just slaughtered ruthlessly by critics, the buzz really dampened on this thing. If you want to check out my review, you can. It's right up there in the corner. You can click. It wasn't a movie that I particularly enjoyed. I didn't think it was the absolute train wreck disaster of disasters that a lot of people did, but it certainly wasn't very good. And it's not looking like it's going to have the kind of momentum that will make it the kind of phenomenon that the Broadway show is. That show has grossed over $225 million to date, which is crazy when you think about it. It is a very successful show, and the soundtrack is very successful. It has a very big cult following. The reviews are generally poor. The cinema score was at an A-. I think that was probably bolstered by a lot of people that went on that opening night that were fans of the show, that were also fans of the movie. I was reading some of the coverage from Deadline that said that the recommend scores were actually going down as the weekend went, because it seemed like the highest enthusiasm was on its opening night. Now, if there's any good news here for Evan Hansen, it's that the budget was only about $28 million. So it's not a Cats-like disaster where that movie cost $90 million and was just a massive financial failure. It just shows that Broadway is very difficult to bring to the big screen and find a mass audience, to find that mass appeal. There have been examples where it's worked. Chicago, La La Land, which is an original musical, The Greatest Showman, which is from the same songwriters as Dear Evan Hansen, as was La La Land, actually. So it's not as if musicals have not found success, but it is elusive. And Dear Evan Hansen not able to find the kind of success I'm sure they were hoping for. Free Guy in its 7th week was at number 3. Candyman 2021, despite again being on premium video on demand, is still in the top 5 in its 5th week of release. These are bigger legs than we usually see with a typical horror film. We're going to talk about Candyman a little bit more later on. Cry Macho in its 2nd week falls to number 5, another one of HBO Max's day and date streaming releases. Let's look at the top per theater average, and that was taken by El Planeta, which is a Spanish film from director Amalia Ullman. One theater in New York, $7,181. That is the same theater, I believe, that we talked about last week, the IFC Center in New York. Actually, a lot of times when we see a movie with a big per theater average, it'll come from the IFC Center in New York, because they do big spotlights for these smaller films. They do Q&As, things that really bring in a lot of foot traffic. So that particular venue bringing in another per theater winner for this past weekend. If we look at the top 5 movies that were in specialty or limited release, what we'd call 1,000 theaters or fewer, at number 1 is Love Story, which is an Indian film in the Telugu language. It actually ranked at last measure, I didn't see the final numbers for this film, at number 10 overall at the box office, reportedly at $971,000. I saw some estimates that were a little bit lower, so we may update that next week. But that was the number 1 movie in in limited release. The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which we've seen on this chart for the last couple weeks, actually expanded over 1,000 theaters, so I took it off of this chart. So at number 2 is The Card Counter in its third week in 739 theaters with just under $295,000. Blue Bayou in its third week at number 3 with $161,000. The Alpinist in its third week at $69,000. And I'm Your Man debuts in just 16 theaters, bringing in $32,917. Let's expand beyond the domestic box office and look internationally and see what the top 5 films were. And once again, for the second week in a row, it is Dune. It continues its international rollout and plays in the markets in which it opened last week, and it is the number 1 movie again outside of the domestic marketplace with $26.3 million. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is at number 2 with another $14 million, followed by China's Cloudy Mountain, Free Guy, and Paw Patrol the movie at numbers 3, 4, and 5. So when you add up the international numbers with the domestic weekend, we get our worldwide numbers, and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings just barely stays number 1 worldwide, just edging out Dune, $27 million to $26.3 million. Cloudy Mountain stays at number 3. Free Guy stays at number 2. And then driven exclusively by its North American debut, or I should say a US and Canada debut, Dear Evan Hansen is at number 5. Even though we're going into the last weekend of September, there's still a little bit of business to be settled with the summer box office, although I believe that next week will be the last update that we're going to have to make, but we have a big one to make this week because, as I mentioned, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is now the number 1 movie of the summer. It surpasses Black Widow. It is now going to easily pass the $200 million mark domestically. Black Widow gets bumped down to number 2, so it's going to be locked in there. F9 and A Quiet Place Part 2 are going to be locked in at numbers 3 and number 4. However, next week, look how close Free Guy and Jungle Cruise are. Free Guy is going to supplant Jungle Cruise and become the 5th highest grossing movie of the summer. Jungle Cruise is going to end at number 6. Cruella, Space Jam: A New Legacy, and The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It are going to stay at 7, 8, and 9. And then right now, The Boss Baby Family Business is at number 10, but Candyman is very, very close behind it. And because it has been hanging on at the domestic box office, next week, our final update should be bumping Free Guy into the top 5, putting Candyman in at the top 10, and that is going to be our final lineup for summer 2021, the final domestic grosses. When we look at it based on my predictions, it looks like I will have been able to predict 8 of the top 10 films, having missed only on The Suicide Squad and In the Heights. But the only rank that I think I would have gotten exactly correct is Candyman at that number 10 spot. But still, 8 out of 10, given all of the volatility of the summer, etc. I'm actually pretty happy that I was able to do that well. Let's look at the 2021 worldwide chart. We looked at the domestic chart earlier when we were talking about Shang-Chi, and really not a whole lot of change except for that number 10 spot. We see Chinese Doctors has dropped out. Jungle Cruise is now in, although that's a very close spot. There's a couple different movies that are right close to each other, so we may see some changeover in that number 10 spot in the next couple days. Raging Fire's up there. Jungle Cruise is up there. But for right now, Jungle Cruise is now the 10th highest grossing film of the year worldwide. Everything else stays the same, but look at Shang-Chi. It's only $14 million behind Black Widow worldwide, so we could see that change over and see Shang-Chi move into the top 5 worldwide for 2021. And then when we look at the last 365 days worldwide, we see that this is actually not changed at all. No change on the chart this week, although we have a couple of movies. Demon Slayer the movie is less than 20 days away from rotating off this chart. My People, My Homeland will rotate off this chart next week. We will see if we can keep this 365-day chart going, or if it's just going to become the 2021 chart like it was when we were tracking domestically. If that's the case, then we'll retire this for now, but it'll be back at some point when it becomes interesting to look at again. Before we move on to the streaming charts, I wanted to look at a previous weekend in box office history, a box office flashback, and we're going to go back to September 28th through the 30th, 2012. Hotel Transylvania, the first one. The 4th Hotel Transylvania movie is going to be premiering on Amazon this week after it was pulled from theaters by Sony. But we are only 9 years away from the debut of the first one, just over $42 million. But also back in 2012, Looper, the same weekend, premiered with $20.8 million. There would be a Star Wars movie in Rian Johnson's future and a whole bunch of headaches. End of Watch was at number 2 in its second week at $7.8 million. Trouble with the Curve in its second week was $7.2 million. And it was a very close race between 3, 4, and 5. In its second week, the Jennifer Lawrence, I didn't even remember that she starred in this movie, film House at the End of the Street was $7.1 million. But something that's not in that top 5, if you look down in the bottom corner, Pitch Perfect had fantastic legs. I think it had over 12 times its debut. It opened in 6th place, went on to become a cult hit, of course, then would generate 2 sequels. So that just goes to show you that it's not always about the top 5 movies. Sometimes it's how a movie does after it opens, because we saw here the birth of a franchise with a movie that didn't even open inside of the top 5. Let's take a look now at what people are watching at home on streaming, and we'll start, as we always do, with Amazon, where the number 1 film is F9. The rental window is now open on F9, so first it was purchase and PVOD. Now you can rent it, and it's number 1 on Amazon. At number 2 is Candyman, in the top 5 at the box office, but also in the top 5 on Amazon, the premium video on demand of that film. The Protégé, which is just a few weeks out from opening in theaters, is available for purchase. It's at number 3. Don't Breathe 2 is at number 4. Venom jumps onto the Amazon charts at number 5. A lot of people getting ready for the sequel, which opens this weekend. And then the rest of the top 10 are holdovers: A Quiet Place Part 2, Respect, Jungle Cruise, Stillwater, and Black Widow. Looking at what people are buying through the iTunes store, F9 is number 1 there as well, as either a purchase or a rental. The Protégé is at number 2. Paw Patrol the movie has now rotated out of its exclusive streaming/theatrical window. It's available to purchase and is at number 3. Venom moves up to number 4. Candyman is at number 5. The Martian jumps onto the chart at number 6. Black Widow at number 7. Cruella now open for purchase and rental, so it comes in at number 8 on iTunes. The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard is at number 9. And The Unholy, which is a fairly recent horror film, was available for a 99-cent rental, so I think a lot of people were maybe getting in the Halloween spirit, and that comes onto the top 10. Looking at what people are watching on Netflix, at number 1 is Squid Game, which I've actually seen a lot of social media traffic about. This is really kind of turning into a buzzy show. It is from Korea, and I may have to check it out because it seems like a lot of people are catching on. It moves up to number 1. I think it was at number 2 when we did the chart last week. At number 2 is the Netflix original movie The Starling from director Theodore Melfi, starring Melissa McCarthy. At number 3, the new limited series from Mike Flanagan, Midnight Mass. I've heard some great things about that. That's going to go on the list. My Little Pony: A New Generation, which is kind of a restart or a new chapter of the My Little Pony franchise, apparently. So if you've ever dreamed of being a brony, this could be your jumping off point. At number 5 is the movie Intrusion, which stars Frida Pinto and Logan Marshall Green. At number 6, the Adam Sandler movie Grown Ups. At number 7, a new season of the Netflix original series Sex Education. At number 8, Monsters Inside, the 24 Faces of Billy Milligan. At number 9, and at number 10 is Clickbait, the Netflix original series. It stays on the chart. And finally, looking at just the movies that people are watching on Netflix, at number 1 is The Starling. At number 2, My Little Pony: A New Generation. At number 3, Intrusion. At number 4, Grown Ups. Safe House stays on the chart at number 5. 2 Netflix originals at number 6 and 7, Vivo and Kate. At number 8, my favorite movie, Jaws. Hell yeah. Good job, people. I guess that's to counterbalance the people that are watching Grown Ups. The Father Who Moved Mountains is at number 9. And at number 10 is the animated film Home. And that does it for charts for this previous box office weekend. Coming up this week, we have a big movie weekend coming up. We have the Addams Family 2 opening, the animated sequel. We have the Many Saints of Newark, which is the Sopranos prequel movie. Of course, there's Venom, Let There Be Carnage, the much anticipated Venom film that was moved up, unlike a lot of other new releases. Hotel Transylvania Transformania also hits Amazon this week, and in more limited release, amongst other films, the film that won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, Titan, is hitting theaters. So a lot of different options from a lot of different genres if you're heading to the movie theaters this weekend. Of course, be sure to stay tuned here. I'm going to have reviews of Venom, Let There Be Carnage probably on Thursday night. I'm going to be seeing that on Thursday afternoon. I think I'm going to try to get one up of the Many Saints of Newark, and who knows, maybe I'll try to shoot the moon and watch as many as I can this weekend. weekend. Stay tuned here for news and reviews, and thank you so much for watching me. If you want to see even more of what I'm up to, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. And I want to especially thank these patrons. These are my producer level patrons. They are the top tier over on Patreon, and we have so much fun. They help to choose what movies we watch as part of our movie club every week. They help to prep me for my Schmodown matches. We have monthly Schmodown prep matches. We also have other exclusives that are for producers, directors, and then most of what we do is what everybody can see over there. Movie commentaries, Schmodown commentaries, lots of great stuff. I'd love to have you come and join me over on Patreon, but I also appreciate you watching me here on YouTube. Stay tuned because hopefully this week, if not definitely next week, I'm going to be able to announce some very cool new changes to the channel and new ways that you can enjoy the stuff that I'm making here. Thank you so much for watching. Get ready for a big movie-going weekend. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.